Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Diversity and Inclusion in Senior Living, an imperative for senior living providers. I'm Susan Ryan, and I'm the Senior Director for the Greenhouse Project, and I'm grateful that you've taken time to spend with us this afternoon. So some real quick housekeeping. I just want to let you know that the webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link a couple hours after we finish the webinar. You will get the PowerPoint along with the recording. And if you go to the right-hand side of your screen, you will see where you can download a PDF of today's presentation. You're in listen-only mode, so that means that if you want to ask a question, you can do so in the chat box, which is also on the right-hand side of your screen. So before I introduce today's speaker, I just want to acknowledge and express a debt of gratitude to all of the care partners and the care teams that are out there serving courageously and heroically our elders living in a variety of communities. You, in my opinion, are the heroes among us, and I applaud you and I commend you. And I hope that you will continue to find safety, strength, and even moments of peace amid the storm as you carry on. Thank you. We are truly appreciative and in awe of your work. So now on to today's webinar. I met Jennifer. I had the privilege of meeting Jennifer. We were both at a women's retreat last December. And I so enjoyed and connected with her tremendously in both conversation and hearing her on a panel. Jennifer is a fellow Marylander, and she serves as Broadmead's Director of Diversity and Inclusion. Broadmead is a life plan community just outside Baltimore, Maryland. Prior to Broadmead, Jennifer led diversity efforts in healthcare and higher education for the past 15 years. Jennifer has quite the impressive educational pedigree, beginning with a bachelor's degree in linguistics from the University of California in Santa Barbara, a master's degree from the acclaimed Counseling and Personnel Services program at the University of Maryland, and a PhD in education from Claremont Graduate University. As I mentioned when I met Jennifer, she was part of a panel discussion of distinguished women, and they were speaking on topics that were of relevance, and diversity was one of those topics. I was so inspired by her words and by the work that she does each day. So with that, Jennifer, it's all yours. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and thank you for those of you who have showed interest in this topic and are joining us here today. I'm going to go ahead and open up my slides. Oh, I'm so sorry, I accidentally closed. There we go. Open up my slides so you can follow along with me here. As you know, we are talking about diversity and inclusion in senior living, and I will share a bit about my background in this work, some history about the organization that I work with, and some of the work that we are doing to really shift the culture. It's really a cultural shift that we're working on at Broadmead, and this work is so near and dear to my heart that I love sharing what we get to do at Broadmead in hopes to inspire this shift in other communities and for older adults of all backgrounds. So I'm going to start with a moment of silence, and what where this comes from is really the fact that Broadmead, the life plan community where I work, is based on Quaker values. And one of the things we often do before meetings and before other gatherings is we take a moment of silence to get ourselves grounded and in the space. So please join me in just a moment of silence. All right, thank you. There's so much going on in the world right now, and so much, I'm sure, on all of our minds. So thank you for taking that moment with me. All right, so what we're going to talk about this afternoon is we will explore what diversity and inclusion means for senior living. We'll talk about how we can better understand the value of diversity and inclusion in the workplace, particularly in this field. And we'll also I'll share with you how Broadmead has turned its diversity ideals into strategy. So a little bit about me. This picture is actually my son. He has spastic quadriplegia, cerebral palsy. And, you know, while my family background has lent itself very much to the work that I do, my son, with his different abilities, continues to inspire the work that I do. So I am Filipino American by heritage, and I grew up in California. And so when I talk about being bicultural, it was the fact that I was an American girl brought up by immigrant parents who tried to raise me in a way that was culturally relevant for them, which meant Filipino, traditional, very different from the ways in which my friends interacted at school. And so I remember struggling at times and not always feeling like I fit in. On one hand, I didn't look like my classmates who were predominantly white and with blonde hair, blue eyes, brown hair, lighter skinned. And then I'd go home and my parents would be very strict and have me not allow me to go out and do certain things that my friends were doing. And so this bicultural experience, this feeling of really not fully feeling in place, was something I recall growing up with and experiencing quite a bit. But it also lended me to be able to be more empathic toward others, and being able to kind of sense when maybe someone else was not included, maybe when someone else wasn't being accepted, and really to be able to find a space to speak out and connect with those folks and make sure that they did feel included and feel part of the class or the community, etc. So that was, most of my experience growing up in a predominantly white community. It wasn't until college that when I was an RA, I was in training as a resident assistant my senior year of college. And one of our requirements for training was a diversity training experience. And it required us to really share our stories. We were asked to share aspects of ourselves that I hadn't really ever talked about. And what I found was by giving voice to my experience and sharing that with folks I was still getting to know, it opened up dialogue, it opened up connection, it opened up opportunities for us to find points of connection that we would not have found otherwise. And it strengthened our relationships. It strengthened the work we did together, and it strengthened and built friendships and bridges across the different experiences that we had. And so that was really the beginning of this passion for this work and wanting to really create spaces where I could help develop those points of connection. And so I continued the line of work in diversity in higher education. I directed diversity efforts at different colleges and universities for the course of about 15 years. Prior to Broadmead, I directed diversity efforts in healthcare at GBMC. And so my passion for this work continues. It's just extended to different areas. And once again, I have 3 kids, but my oldest son, I think about how do we make sure a space, a world, our world is accepting of folks like him, that we create spaces for folks that might not fit, kind of that majority. So that's a little bit about me. So I want to learn a little bit about yourselves and your organizations. So we're going to go into the poll. Meg, you want to go ahead and take it? So I'm going to, let's see.
Jennifer, do you see the poll? The poll has been opened. And so
Oh, no, I don't see
for
it.
those of you on the call, if you want to just select one, my organization values diversity and inclusion. Select one. You agree, you disagree, or you're not sure. So if you take a couple moments and just indicate where you would assess your organization. All right, why don't you close the poll, Meg, and we'll see what people have said. So it looks like 82% of you said you agree. 5% said you disagree, and 14% said you were not sure. So back to you, Jennifer.
All right. So the next question. Sorry, having some technical difficulties here. All right.
So once again, I'll read this. My organization has taken strides to address diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Agree, disagree, I'm not sure. And Meg, if you want to close the poll. It looks like 59% say that they would agree, 19% they disagree, and 22% not quite sure. Jennifer?
Okay. Great. May, can you go ahead and read it? I can't see it on my.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay.
My organization has hired a full-time employee to address diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Yes, no, I'm not sure. Go ahead and make your selection. All right, Meg, you want to close the poll? So overwhelmingly, 76% said no, 6% yes, and 18% not sure.
Good. All right. And the last question is around what your organization has done in terms of the actions to show its value for diversity and inclusion. And instead of a poll per se, I'm going to ask you to note in the chat box the number that corresponds to what practices your organization has taken. And if there are additional practices or something else, please note that in the chat box. So put a 1 if your organization uses best practices to hire and retain a diverse and inclusive workforce. Put a 2 in the chat box if your organization provides training and development for employees related to diversity and inclusion. Put a 3 in the chat box if your organization markets your services to diverse community organizations, such as, including ads in the local paper to attract people of color or other diverse populations. Put a 4 in the chat box if your organization networks with other organizations that attract people of color or other diverse populations. And, if there are other steps that your organization has taken to show its value for diversity and inclusion, please include those in the chat box. Nice. Seeing some good responses there. I think it goes to show that there's a variety of ways in which organizations can show their value, how they value diversity and inclusion efforts. So just typing in some notes for myself to remember where we are and what your responses are. I'll take a moment in case folks have, okay, universal design. Okay. Wonderful. All right, so I wanted to begin with the poll just to get a sense of, who's in the audience, who's here in this space, and what's going on in your organizations. And I'll go through and talk a little bit more about the work that I'm doing, but I do invite some conversation, and not just questions really, but conversation later about some of what you all are doing, because I think this is a really great opportunity for some sharing as well. So wonderful. I see developing inclusion and diversity framework. Great. Great. Okay. Wonderful. So a lot of different 2s, 3s. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and move on with the presentation. And once again, this is really for our knowledge to know who's in the space with us, but also to know that from what you all have shared, it looks like there is a variety of ways in which your organizations have been doing this work. All right. So back to my slides. All right. So what is diversity and inclusion? And I'm going to describe this by sharing one of my favorite quotes around diversity and inclusion. And it is by a diversity and inclusion expert named Vernee Myers. And she says that diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. And I love the way she frames it this way. Because when we talk about diversity, you can't have diversity without inclusion. And to be honest, it's a whole new another presentation too, to really talk about equity, which is a key piece of this whole thing as well. But when we talk about diversity and inclusion specifically, diversity it's oftentimes the numbers. It's the folks of all backgrounds, really coming together. Sometimes we think about at our organizations, what do the numbers look like? What's the racial, ethnic, demographic, gender, socioeconomic differences, sexual orientation, etc. And the inclusion piece is key because you can't have those numbers without making sure that everybody feels like they are part of the organization and really part of the work that's being done. And as I shared my story earlier, that inclusion is really that sense of belonging, that sense that, I belong in this space, whether it is as an employee or as a resident, that sense of belonging is really important. So those two really go hand in hand. When we talk particularly about the older adult population, I just want to share some data with you, and I won't go into full details about them all, but really we know that the older adult population is growing larger and more diverse. We know the numbers show, we're showing, during the 2010 census. I know that we'll see some updated numbers very soon once they gather the information from this year's census and collect that information. But we know that those numbers are projected. It's projected that 42% of the older adult population will be members of racial or ethnic minority groups by 2050. Not to mention other aspects of diversity. So, let's talk about how, aspects of diversity around hearing loss, that when we're working with the older adult population, 75% of individuals aged 70 years or older have some degree of hearing loss. 65% of individuals aged 50 years or older have some, low vision. 1/5 of older adults, once again, are currently people of color, and the projection is there again. Also, let's talk about the LGBT population, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, bisexual, transgender older adult population, and the diversity among these groups as well. And this is just a snapshot. I'm not giving the full scope of when we talk about the different experiences and backgrounds, experiences that folks have, the backgrounds that they come from, but there's data out there that depending on the group, there are different, issues and concerns and needs that some groups are, needs that some groups have compared to others. And so, for example, in this survey that I reference, among LGBT older adults, many of the participants had greater rates of disability, depression, and loneliness, and increased likeliness to smoke and binge drink compared with heterosexuals of similar ages. So there's information out there to show that not only are the numbers there, but also the diversity of experience is there as well. So let me talk a little bit about Broadmead and this life plan community tucked away in Baltimore County, where that decided last year to hire a full-time diversity professional to really do this work. So in general, our community has a continuum of care with centers of excellence in dementia care and health and wellness. We also provide home and community-based services. So if older adults want to age in place at home, while we do have our community that folks can live at, we also offer services in the community. We have approximately 400 residents on site here at Broadmead, and we serve about 100 clients through our community outreach services. Our housing is 98% occupied. We have about 350 employees, and we're on 94 acres in Baltimore County. So that's a little bit of background on our community. I want to give you some history too around our Quaker values and how this really is in line with the diversity work that we do. So our community is 40 years old. It was based on Quaker values, which are for us really revolve around the community, integrity, serenity, lifelong learning, simplicity, and the light. And actually this light that I'm going to talk about in just a minute was one of the big reasons that I decided to take on this opportunity at Broadmead. There's this belief among Quakers that there is the light of God in everyone. And so for me personally and professionally in my diversity work, that's actually a guiding principle for me to really see more than what people show themselves to be, that there really is that inner light. There's that beauty, that desire to connect. There's that something in all of us that wants to feel included and in place and feel like we're part of, part of something bigger. And so that really attracted me, because when I think about diversity and inclusion, sometimes what happens is folks kind of turn away from diversity because they think it's a bad thing, that it's that maybe other people are being left out, even though it's actually the opposite. Maybe that there are just some communities and some folks who just feel like it's such a bad thing. And so really, when you can see that light in everyone, when there is a difference among folks and people are not connecting or not getting along, when you can see that light, you see that diversity, you see that connection, and you see that beauty and value in one another. So that's one of the things that brought me, to Broadmead. Also, with some history around Quakers, is they were also the first abolitionists. Just a lot of connection with diversity and inclusion values as well. And yet for the 40 years of its existence, Broadmead has not seen the visible shift in the racial ethnic demographic of their community. And so that was really reflecting on this time and place, looking at the data and wanting to be really the community that will be recognized as being welcoming of folks of all backgrounds. That was really one of the pieces that stood out to Broadmead in their decision to take diversity and inclusion efforts, really as a strategic initiative of theirs, and to hire someone full-time to take it on. This quote, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but in 1998, there was an ad hoc committee on community inclusiveness. And I love this quote that one of the chair actually of the Board of Trustees had actually shared at that time. And in the late 90s, you know, they talked about their approach to diversity being to emphasize and facilitate the wholeness of our community and to deepen our connections with one another. And so, once again, this information and this diversity and inclusion work had been going on, but it had starts and stops, and it was a priority, but then other priorities, you know, took over. And so the goal and the belief and what's true from my experience is that by Broadmead making the decision to hire a full-time person, you know, in 2019, it really was to make sure that there wasn't another start and stop with their diversity efforts, that it was something that there would be somebody who would be putting this at the forefront on a regular basis and reminding the community that this is something we've committed to and that there's a lot of work to be done and that the work takes all of us. So when I talk about diversity and inclusion strategy for Broadmead, our original strategic plan focus, and this work before my arrival, probably around 2015, Broadmead had said they had made the decision that they were going to commit to adding diversity and inclusion as part of their strategic plan focus. And so at the time, and to be honest, it hasn't shifted much. This is very similar to the continued strategic plan around our diversity and inclusion efforts. It really is to expand the programs we offer to a population of older adults that reflects the diversity of the Mid-Atlantic region. And this was well thought out. It was discussed constantly, whether do we want to reflect the diversity of the Baltimore area, Maryland, just the local states, but it really was recognizing that there's great diversity in the Mid-Atlantic region, and we're right here in the midst of it. So we want to reflect that. Early initiatives that the board, the diversity and inclusion group that started this work. This is actually just before my arrival. They developed a diversity and inclusion work group. And the diversity and inclusion work group, through their research, through their education, through their data collection, and through their collaboration with diversity experts in higher education, through their research of what other life plan communities were doing, this was the group that found that, you know, we really don't have a lot of best practices in senior living around diversity and inclusion. And they found another life plan community named Aldersgate in North Carolina that had actually hired a full-time person and decided that because of the similarity between the communities, between the success that that community was experiencing, that's when Broadmead decided to go ahead and hire a full-time person. And so when I came on board last year, one of the first things I did was develop resident diversity dialogues, because I'd never go into a community to lead diversity and inclusion strategic efforts without making sure I know about the community and what the needs are and who we're serving. And so it was really helpful for me to get to know them and for them to get to know me. And to be, look, I'll be honest with you, there were residents who really didn't get why this was important. Why was their money being spent on this person to do this diversity thing? Some of them shared, you know, well, they, people of color, or other people don't want to be here. If they did, they would be here already, you know. And so part of my learning of the community was really listening and understanding their perspectives and their experiences. And what was interesting too was, while that was some of what I heard, I also heard, thank goodness you're here. This is the least diverse place I've ever lived, and I would love for this community to reflect, you know, more places where I've lived. Or I have children or grandchildren who are multiracial or biracial or of different religions, or who are LGBT, or what have you. And there's been such this openness as well about wanting to be part of our efforts to diversify the community and enhance our learning around other cultures and experiences. And so honoring interests of the current community was really the first step for me, and I think a really valuable step for embarking on these efforts, anywhere. What is the community like and what are the needs? They had some residents speak and share their experiences. A resident shared how he was, had been jailed while inviting an African-American person to his home because because people didn't want Black folks in that area, and so we had friends and family of residents also share their experiences and expertise. Some of them are professors in a certain in certain areas. We had a professor who focused on American Indian experiences and talked about that at our community. And so I found that there had been some opportunities for learning a different culture, learning about other cultures, et cetera, and diversity related programs throughout the community already. And so how could we build on that? I also heard from some of the Jewish residents who felt that Broadmead had not done a good job about listening to their experiences and to honoring some of the Jewish holidays. When, at one point, Broadmead had hosted an event on one of the major Jewish holidays. And so, listening to these stories was really valuable. So as I was listening to these stories, there was also a lot of engagement in, well, what can we do? So one example is one of our cluster groups, a group of some of residents decided to get together and start a book group. They read the book Waking Up White and they talked about it. And so that was one group that started. The Multicultural Committee hosted trips to the National Museum of African American History and Culture. I started facilitating story circles where residents could share their stories and experiences with one another to find those points of connection. And so, once I was able to hear and learn more about what the residents needed and the connections they were trying to make, I was able to move with, okay, more of the strategy around the work that needed to be done. So, every strategic plan has its objectives. At Broadmead, we do, our focus is, to increase the number of older of color residing in independent living. Another area of focus is to increase the number of clients of color that we serve through community outreach services. We also want to be a leader when it comes to serving the needs of LGBT older adults. And most importantly, really, it's about cultivating a welcoming and inclusive culture for our residents, staff, and trustees. Because if folks do not feel welcomed and included at Broadmead, then all the work we're doing with outreach, et cetera, is all for naught. So I'm sharing this with you, and our community, Broadmead, has been very transparent about sharing our story, our challenges, our goals, because, if other communities want to do the same, more power to all of us to really create environments that are welcoming of folks of all backgrounds, because the fact is the demographics are showing that they're there, right? The older adult population is growing more diverse. So what are we doing to better serve their needs? So, I talked about some of the work that I'm doing around Broadmead. Some other strategies that we're focusing on include outreach. So going out in the community, whether it's at events or through social media, writing publications, so that we're getting our name out there about who we are, but also sharing information about what we offer. What I found in some of the organizations I've gone out to is that some folks, first of all, had never heard of Broadmead, don't know what a life plan community is, and really don't even realize that there are spaces beyond, what they see in terms of nursing cares and assisted living. And so being able to educate the community on what we have available for them. And as I mentioned, we also do work for folks who want to age in place. So we go into homes and support them that way. I shared earlier that I'm Filipino American, and my parents growing up, immigrants from the Philippines, had always communicated to me and my siblings that we were expected to take care of them as they aged. And that was just an expectation. It was a cultural thing. And as I've shared this story, I've found that there have been many other cultures and communities of color in particular who had been given the same message. You take care of your own. And so part of my work and my outreach has been to talk about, kind of break that myth down that that's really the only option, and to make sure that folks know that there's so much that a life plan community can offer. And to be honest, some of those cultural pieces are also shifting as folks, in their 40s, 50s, around my age, as we take care of our children and work full time, how many of us actually have the capacity to really care for, our parents the same way that they do, really how they deserve, especially if health issues are to arise. And so really making sure that folks know what resources are available to them. Other things that we've done have been community dinners, to once again share information about who we are and what we do. Our work also delves into professional development opportunities for our staff, because yes, the work is about our residents, but it's about the whole community, and it's about our staff as well. And so offering professional development opportunities, I did some training around ouch, that stereotype hurts, and providing folks with language around how do we talk to each other when we're well-meaning, but we say hurtful things sometimes. How do we really talk about those things? And in the works are Bias Sync, which is an online training module to address bias, and Sage Care certification, which will really put us on the map in terms of being an LGBT-friendly organization serving older adults. I partnered with the Multicultural Committee, to bring speakers in, to host cultural celebrations, and really some of our measures are about engagement scores. If we can see our engagement scores increase in certain areas among employees and residents, that will really be a good gauge for us to see whether or not some of our efforts are really making some movement. So I'll go into a little more outreach and talk about some of the work that we're doing with our teams as well. But I really want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A and really the conversation piece. So, please I'm excited about engaging with you all a bit more. So with community outreach, relationship building has been really a key component and continues to be a key component. Here are two events that we attended. We had a Broadmead table at each event and talked with several attendees and folks who were there. To the left is at Morgan State University, which is a historically Black college in Baltimore, and that was a concert, the Baltimore Community Concert Choir performance hosted by Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. And to the right is the Alzheimer's Association event, and that was serving some of the African American community. And so really, once again, our visibility was really important. The opportunity to share the information about who we are and what we do, really is helping us to really get into communities that might not have been familiar with us before, and to build those ongoing relationships. We know that the decision to live in a life plan community is not one that happens overnight. It's something that really can take the course of years. And so we're okay with that. We know that that's part of the work that we're doing. And so we're taking our time to get to know the community, for them to get to know us, and to build those relationships. Hosting and sponsoring events. We co-sponsored a women's leadership forum just earlier this year, and it attracts a number of women of color in particular. And so part of our hosting and sponsoring events and networking and relationship building, it's not just with older adults, because older adults have kids. And sometimes it's getting the information out there across communities, across generations as well. And so we've really expanded our outreach in many ways. To the right is a photo of one of the dinners that we hosted. I call them Discover, Dine, and Dialogue. And we provide dinner and talk about, who we are at Broadmead and what we do, and give the opportunity for the folks in attendance to talk to each other. What are they looking for, in a life plan community or as they age? What are their needs and what are their interests? So that's, some of the events that we host. Diversity and inclusion in the workforce. So let's talk a little bit about some of the work that we do with our staff. We know that our employees are our greatest asset. And so I put some questions up here. And once again, it sounds like some of you are already embarking on this journey with your teams, but really understanding the data behind what our organizations look like in terms of the staff demographic, and what are our goals? What are we looking to move towards? So what are the racial, ethnic demographics of the workforce? Does your organization track the number of LGBT employees? Who do you want your workforce to reflect? I mentioned earlier how for our residents in particular, it was reflecting the diversity of the Mid-Atlantic region. For the workforce, for your organization, is it the community that you serve? Is it what the local demographic looks like? Are there opportunities to hire staff of different abilities? I know folks use disabilities. Oftentimes that's the term that's used. I use different abilities, because it's just my belief that we do things differently. It looks different based on what what someone is able to do. Are there generational differences among your workforce? And does the racial and ethnic demographic of your leadership look different from the rest of the workforce? And I'll tell you that ours does. And so it's work that we pay attention to. So employees are our greatest asset. Those are just some questions to put out there in terms of really thinking about what our organizations look like. And once again, diversity is one thing. Inclusion, I think, is a key piece of that, because you can have just incredible diversity among your workforce. But do folks feel included? Do folks feel like they are part of the community? And so, oftentimes working with organizations and really around strategy, there's often a question of, well, how do you measure the change? How do you measure that what we're doing is making a difference? And it can be tough with diversity and inclusion efforts, but one of the ways that I found to be most effective is really through some of our employee engagement surveys, and adding questions around something that we can measure over time. So here are some of my favorite questions that I feel can speak to that shift over time. If can folks really say that they feel like they belong at the company? And so do you see a change from year to year, or every other year, or every 5 years, however often you do your engagement surveys? Does management show that diversity is important through its actions? Does your company respect individuals and value their differences? These are the kinds of things that if your employees can say, yeah, we do that, it's a point of pride. It's a point of feeling connected. It's a part of, feeling like it is an organization that values equity. And those are really important things. So I won't go through all of these. You will have the slides with you, but once again, just things to think about when we are exploring diversity and inclusion, trying to measure whether or not a difference has been made, and making sure that we're really hearing where and what our employees are saying, and understanding where the concerns may be coming from. This all falls under the umbrella. So snapshot of some of the work that we're doing at Broadmead, sharing with you in case, on your journeys, we can provide some sense of support for you. And sharing also, excuse me, I believe I'll hang up soon, that diversity is not a destination to be reached, but it is a journey that has many milestones. And so really recognizing that once we hit a marker, it's not like, okay, we're done with this, but that it really is ongoing, and that it really is a journey. And I also want to mention that, for organizations that have hired someone, to spearhead this work, or someone whether it's part-time or full-time or what have you, that person is there to help kind of, lead those efforts in many ways. But it's the kind of work that takes everybody, by partnership with folks in the community, by partnership with my colleagues, with the residents. That makes my work successful. When I can partner with folks in the community and beyond, and move our work forward, that's really the value and the strength of that cultural transformation that I was talking about. It really takes all of us, and we are all really in it together. All right, thank you.
Jennifer, thank you. That was tremendous. Really, I learned so much, and I feel inspired once again for hearing you speak. And you speak with such passion. And honestly, I want to thank you even for starting with that moment of silence at such a time as this, and to really tap into the culture of your community and to share that with each of us. I feel it just really set a nice stage. So I want to invite all of our listeners to please put your questions in the box, and I will read those out to Jennifer. Here's just a comment from Michelle Daniel, she had dinner with you in Fort Lauderdale at the Women's Conference, and she said she signed up when she saw you were the speaker, and happy to listen to more of what you do. Very inspiring. So just a comment for you there. And here's a question. What is the greatest barrier from your perspective in creating inclusion?
The greatest
kind of a broad question, but
it is. I think that what happens is folks think that we've arrived, that we have already created these spaces. People are already friendly, so why do we have to do this work anymore? And even at a place like Broadmead, it is true that folks are very friendly, folks are really welcoming, definitely so. But I recall talking to a resident about some of the work we were doing around LGBT older adults. And she said, well, why are you focusing on that? She's like, people, we have, gay and lesbian residents here, and they're fine. They don't have any issues. And I said, well, then how would you feel if they walked around the community holding hands? You think that they'd feel comfortable doing that? Because I haven't observed that myself. And would you feel comfortable with that as well? And the resident paused and said, I wouldn't be comfortable with that. And so on one hand, I think many of us have this belief, and we all do sincerely want to be as open and welcoming as we can, and we are, but we also have biases that we're not always aware of. There are things about our experiences and ways in which we might not be as open, to certain things as others, and might not quite be aware of it until something comes to light and something raises our, awareness around something that made us uncomfortable. And so it's that lack of awareness, I think, that can prevent us from being willing to do the work, because there's this sincere belief that we got this, we're done with this, we're post-racial, there's no issue. So that's kind of one of the barriers.
Yeah, we could probably talk a lot about that and unconscious bias and that sort of thing. But here's another question. Do you do any work or have any goals on addressing the cost of residential care facilities, which can be a significant barrier for individuals of diverse backgrounds?
Absolutely. And that has come up as a concern in the community. And it has been an area that we have not delved into yet in terms of discounts and addressing some of those financial barriers. The way that we are addressing it on our end is really through our community outreach efforts. And so I talk about, when I'm doing outreach in the community, I talk about, all that Broadmead has to offer. And I also talk about how if folks choose to age in place at home, that we will go into their homes and assist them with, whatever kinds of medical or non-medical assistance they might need. And so part of our focus to really serve a wider population of older adults has been, yes, some folks might choose to live at Broadmead, and that's great. But for folks that might not be able to afford it, or for whom it might not be, a good fit for them, we will assist you in your home. One of the challenges around that has been, residents being very vocal, because they pay a lot of money, they pay good money to be in that place. And so the idea that their money is going to, to other folks, there's still a lot of pushback on that. And so it's an ongoing conversation, and something that we've toyed with on multiple levels. Do we open another space where do we do all these different things? And so we're doing what we can with what we have at this point. But definitely when we talk about strategic planning long term, that's often on our minds about how we can move to that.
Oh, that's great. So here's an interesting comment. The quote by Vernay captures exactly how I see my organization. They are attempting to be diverse, but inclusion is missing. I feel like an outsider, and I'm wondering what I can do to feel included.
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. Because, this diversity and inclusion is about all of us. I think sometimes, particularly white communities feel like, well, I'm not diverse. I'm not part of this. We're all part of this. We're all part of the work, part of the solution, part of the journey. In terms of what you can do and what we can do, really, we need to begin. If the conversation isn't already happening, we need to be having it. And growing up, I was always very shy, and there was a voice inside me that just didn't always know when to speak up. And it's something that I still, am constantly working on. But I found that I can't make change unless I speak up. There are things, and even if people disagree with me and it puts me on the outside, there are things that we just have to say and share sometimes. And of course, in respectful ways. I think sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And so really beginning the conversation around, organizationally, what are we doing? And if you feel like your organization really is trying to address diversity but hasn't quite captured the inclusion piece, maybe part of it is, hey, talking to someone you trust, in the administration, or one of your colleagues, and really saying, hey, I attended this webinar and we talked about how diversity and inclusion go hand in hand. Can I share some of the points I learned through the webinar? But it's really beginning the conversation. Start with folks that you trust, and see if that can kind of snowball and build. Because this work, it's about bettering our organizations. It's not selfish, just about me. It's about us. It's about who we are in our community. It's about the future too. And the data is right there. If that's what we're trying to move towards, it's not just about those numbers. There has to be a sense of that inclusion. There has to be that sense of the feeling that, yes, that's where they belong, that's where they want to be, that's where they want to stay. That will impact retention, because folks will not people have options. People will not stay where they're not happy. So that's on the staff level and residents. If we're there to serve the older adult population, we're going to want to serve them to the best of our ability. And they have come from environments where, once again, as we invite more residents into our spaces, they're coming from more and more diverse environments. So they're going to be seeking that in the places where they live.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that. Yeah, great answer. How do you address racial beliefs of elders and how they treat staff?
Excellent question. You know, and that is, it's a reality of the ways in which folks had grown up, the things that they had learned. And for us, it's been conversations. It's been conversations around respect. It's been conversations around really helping them understand that we're all, you know, here together, and that what they might have said was deemed as disrespectful. And to be honest, some of it too is also balancing understanding the residents' health background, right? Because sometimes it is that, oh, they totally knew it and they were doing it on purpose, and so we can have a conversation with them about it. Some of it is, is there a level of dementia? Is there something there that may be preventing this individual from being, as respectful or using a certain language? And so for us, at least up to this point in our community, it's really been about having those conversations, and the conversation at the core of it is around respect. And how do we hold each other, and that we're all part of the community, whether we're residents or staff, et cetera.
Here's another one. Have you needed to have crucial conversations with elders that do not have welcoming behaviors to others?
I have not. Particularly. What we have decided in terms of handling some of those conversations has been in pulling in our social worker because of their role and in their interaction with the residents. And so the challenge, or not challenge, but kind of the unique piece about my role is, as Director of Diversity and Inclusion, if I'm the one having the crucial conversation, sometimes that could backfire in the sense that it could be harder for me to create the space for inclusion. Now, not to say that I won't do that at some point, but up to this point, the conversations that we've had have been to the point where our social worker has been able to have the initial conversation, and we've been able to, kind of stop there. It's a balancing act because on one hand, yes, I'm really focused on creating an inclusive environment, but on the other hand, too, some folks, there are ways in which I think I can explain things with my diversity hat on, maybe helpful to help them help some residents understand things, and once again, sometimes it can also backfire because, oh my gosh, is she the diversity police? And so I worry about kind of that kind of backlash and not being able to do the work around inclusion that I hope.
Here's one more, and then we will wrap it up. Residents with dementia can pose challenges for inclusion. How has your campus dealt with this?
We really have an incredible team. We have a Center of Excellence in Dementia Care, and they, first of all, they have been really key at making sure that all of us, our team across Broadmead, is trained in dementia care. And so in terms of the ways in which we've handled it, really, with sensitivity, with care, with thoughtfulness, and sometimes it's a continuous conversation, and for staff, it's also having to take a step back and understand where our residents are coming from, and that when it comes to dementia, that it's real, and how do we balance this, kind of the respectful behavior along with understanding kind of the medical piece that's happening in the background. So it's, for us, it has been those conversations, and firm and loving. And like I said, I haven't had to be the front line on having to have those conversations. We have an incredible team who take care of that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's an excellent point, and something that we continue to work on.
Jennifer, this has been so incredibly inspiring, insightful, and I know I have learned a lot in the process, and has certainly caused me to, really sharpen my my self-awareness, and really, you just brought a new lens. So thank you so much for your time today. Before we leave, everyone, yeah, well, we'll have you back. That's for sure. I would love to have you come back. Want to just remind everybody on the call of some webinars that are coming up. Ann Ellett will be with us on Thursday afternoon this week. Ain't nothing like the real thing, to really talk about the value of real relationships with real pets, children, and real people. That's April 9 at 3 o'clock Eastern. And then we've got a friend of Jennifer's. We were all at the conference together. Mindy Cheek from Greystone Communities will be back doing part 2, looking at the workforce culture and LGBT staff, and really creating a more inclusive workplace. So we will build upon some of the things that Jennifer talked about today. On May 6th, to kick off Nurses Week, we want to, first of all, really acknowledge and applaud our nurses. 2020, the World Health Organization designated as Year of the Nurse, and what an incredible year to celebrate the great work that nurses are doing. So we hope you will join us. And please be sure you check our website to really find out more information about our 2020 webinar series. So grateful that you spent time with us today. And once again, thank you, Jennifer, for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. Take care, everyone. Be safe and have a great week. Bye.
Bye.